Well, hello! Now, like many of you, I had a lot of questions when I first heard about this fancy new mRNA-style vaccine that they're using to combat COVID. So I did what anyone would do. I did a lot of research, made a detailed video describing all of my findings, and then created a works cited page. Like a f***ing nerd. Anyway, I hope that you find some of this information useful and not too terribly boring. Now, of course, I realize not all of you are going to care about every single thing I talk about in this video, which is why I created this nifty little table of contents you could use to skip over all of my hard work to get to whatever part you actually care about. Anyway, so the basic structure of this is going to be, we're going to start by talking about how mRNA vaccines work relative to more conventional vaccines. Then we're going to move on to how it was developed, in case you have questions about that. And then side effects and things that you can expect after taking the vaccine, and addressing finally some of the myths, concerns, and etc. that people have. And yes, I am going to talk about microchipping. All human immunity is due to our ability to produce something called antibodies. Now, when we get sick, our body is at war. We've been invaded by this strange foreign entity called a virus that our immune system doesn't know how to deal with yet, and it takes time for it to develop specialized weapons that are designed specifically to kill that invader. Those specialized weapons are called antibodies, and the great thing about them is that they're not only designed to kill the virus right then, but that your body remembers the formula for how to build these specialized weapons, so that if you're exposed to the virus again in the future, you are locked and loaded, ready to take it out, thus providing immunity. Pretty useful, because if there's one thing human beings are good at, it's finding new ways to kill things. With a traditional vaccine, the way that we achieve this is to inject you with weakened or deactivated virus, thereby allowing your immune system time to safely study this foreign entity and develop the antibodies that it needs in order to kill it. That way you are protected in the future if you encounter this virus out in the wild. Now, while this technique is incredibly useful and has saved countless lives over the last 100 years, there is one really big downside to this approach, outside of just the sort of idea of injecting virus corpses into your body, of course, and it's that mass-producing vaccines of this type is incredibly slow. And when you have over 450,000 people that have died already just in the US and the economy's in shambles, time is of the essence. Enter mRNA vaccines. Now, the big upside to this type of vaccine is that we can produce it, mass produce it, much more quickly than a traditional vaccine. But in order to understand how it works, I'm going to have to do a brief little recap of how mRNA and RNA work in the body normally, so bear with me. This is a human cell, and inside of human cells, you will find something called a nucleus. Now, within the nucleus resides your DNA, the entire genetic blueprint for who you are. So this contains the recipes for building your eyes and your nose and your belly button skin and your blood cells and everything in between, right? It's the whole recipe to build a you. If I wanted to clone you, this is what I would need. Now, obviously, there are times when our body needs to replace certain parts. We need to make new blood cells all the time, for example. Right? Well, how does this work? Well, with RNA and mRNA. So obviously the first step, if you're going to replace something like a blood cell, for example, would be to go into your DNA, find the specific part that has the recipe as to how to build a blood cell, and then do something with it. Now here's where RNA comes into play. RNA within the nucleus brushes against the DNA and encodes or copies upon itself that recipe. Now it has become messenger RNA or mRNA. It's called that because now it has a message on it. Makes sense. So the mRNA will then exit the nucleus and go out into the cytoplasm of the cell. Now within the cytoplasm there are these things called ribosomes. Ribosomes will attach to the mRNA and basically read the recipe that it has written on it and start to bind together different types of amino acids in a particular sequence, like a factory, in order to produce whatever proteins are needed to create that part. So congratulations, you've built your blood cell. You've got hemoglobin now. Good job. So that's basically it. You just have your messenger RNA that's been encoded with some information from your DNA going out into your cytoplasm and telling your ribosomes what to build. It's pretty straightforward. Now, interestingly enough, this is actually kind of how viruses work as well. So what they do is they attach to your cell and then inject their own genetic information, their own RNA or DNA, into the cell and hijack your ribosomes and force them to replicate and start producing them instead of whatever they would normally be doing. It's kind of a trolly thing to do because they're using your own machinery against you. Well, the mRNA vaccine actually uses a similar process to beat the virus at its own game. This little asshat of an entity is known as SARS-CoV-2, or as we commonly call it, COVID-19. Notice it's got two distinctive looking parts. It's got the round sort of body looking part and these strange pokey protrusions going all the way around it. Well, the circular body looking part is the part that contains all of the harmful genetic information that it wants to inject into you that makes you sick, and the pokey protrusions around the outside are called protein spikes. Now, the protein spikes by themselves are harmless, but what they allow the virus to do is to attach to your cell so that it can inject that harmful genetic information into you, right? So what the mRNA vaccine, the COVID vaccine, is doing is it's actually injecting into your body the recipe as to how to build those protein spikes, right? So it has the genetic recipe for building protein spikes that your ribosomes will then use to start mass producing them. So why on earth would we want to inject into our bodies messenger RNA that contains the recipe for how to build these protein spikes and then have our ribosomes start to build these protein spikes? I mean, yeah, they're harmless, but why would we want to do that? Well, because the body will recognize these as being foreign entities and develop antibodies to destroy them. And so that if you come into contact with the actual virus, it's going to have antibodies ready to destroy those protein spikes, which will allow the virus to not attach to your cells so it can't inject its genetic information. Now, on top of that, now the virus is exposed to the immune system, which can then actually develop antibodies to destroy it as well. So you're getting a bit of a 2-for-1 deal. Pretty nice. So I've seen a lot of people that appear to be concerned that the vaccine is going to somehow alter their DNA in some sort of a way. Well, luckily, it doesn't. And in fact, it doesn't even go into your nucleus where your DNA is located. All it's doing is using the exact same mechanisms that the virus would have used to hijack your ribosomes and make you sick, and instead to hijack those ribosomes and help provide you with what you need in order to have immunity, rather than try to kill you, which seems like a better deal to me. I've also seen a lot of people that are understandably concerned about the unforeseen long-term consequences of the vaccine, because we did push it out in less than a year, and I think the average time to get a vaccine through is like 8 years. So I understand. But if you understand how the vaccine actually works, it's slightly less concerning, and that's why scientists are fairly certain that there won't be any long-term negative effects. So as far as how long things stay in your body, the actual recipe, the mRNA that we inject into you, actually goes away within just a few days. So the coding that we've injected is gone almost immediately. The protein spikes that it's supposed to be creating so that we can find ways to kill them safely to prevent you from getting the virus, those actually stay in your system only for a few weeks, and then they are destroyed, hence you developing antibodies and getting immunity. And the good parts, the parts that we actually want to stay, the antibodies, are going to stay in your system, obviously, significantly longer. Now, we don't know exactly how long, but there have been studies looking at people who actually recovered from the virus naturally that have shown that it might be up to 8 months for natural immunity. And so we could expect at least a comparable time period for the vaccine to offer protection, if not longer, especially since it's specifically designed to actually provide protection. So yeah, we get to keep the parts that we want for a long time that are natural. Our body produces them. Everything that our body doesn't naturally produce is pretty much out of the body in a few weeks. So doesn't seem like there's much room for long-term negative consequences there. So now we've made it to the development of the vaccine, how it came to be. Now, most people aren't aware that the actual vaccine that we're using today was actually developed as far back as January of last year, well before the pandemic struck America. Now, the concept of an mRNA vaccine has been around much longer, going back to the 90s even. Now, the problem was we weren't able to effectively create an mRNA vaccine up until the last decade or so because RNA is incredibly fragile. It breaks down very quickly when there's heat, so within the body, right? Lots of heat there. And so it was just, there was no way to have it survive long enough to make it to the cytoplasm to be effective. But eureka, they came up with a solution. It was to encase the RNA in a protective lipid nanoparticle layer. Lipid means fat, right? So it's got a fat particle encasing that's keeping it from overheating and breaking apart, right? Think of it as like putting it in a beer cooler, right? You've got these precious contents within your beer cooler that you don't want to get hot and spoiled. Well, that's what the lipid nanoparticles are doing. They're encapsulating the RNA so that the heat won't spoil it. Not that scary. We all enjoy a nice brew now and then. Now, since scientists had developed this fatty, fresh way to protect their messenger RNA, they had already begun work on vaccines for other diseases such as rabies, HIV, or Zika virus using this technique. So while its application for COVID is relatively new, the technology actually isn't really anything new under the sun. It's been tested for years. So as I said, the vaccine that's being used today was developed as far back as January, and what they've been doing since then are doing clinical trials to assess the safety and effectiveness of the vaccine that they had developed. Now, as far as the Pfizer vaccine is concerned, the big phase 3 trial, clinical trial that they were doing, now obviously there was a phase 2 and 1 where they were also testing people, but the big one was phase 3 where they tested over 43,000 people to measure the effectiveness, and they found that there was a 95% effectiveness of preventing COVID with their vaccine, as well as no serious side effects found in the treatment groups, which is pretty promising. Now, Moderna also obviously had to do clinical trials. Phase 3 of theirs measured over 30,000 people and found a 94.1% effectiveness of avoiding getting COVID infection. So both were proven to be highly effective, and both were proven to have no serious side effects, at least during the clinical trials. Now, let's talk about side effects. Now, at this point, over 33 million people have been vaccinated with one of the two of these vaccines, and what we've observed is an incredibly low amount of serious side effects. There are some common side effects, which I'll talk about in a minute, but as far as serious side effects, very, very, very few serious side effects. Now, of these, the most serious side effects was something called anaphylaxis, which is basically just an extreme allergic reaction that the body has in response to the vaccine. Now, when I say rare, what I mean is there are 5 people for every 1 million people that will experience this side effect. At least that's what the data is pointing to at this point. So that seems pretty safe to me, and even though anaphylaxis is a serious side effect, a serious allergic reaction that can be dangerous, it is typically prevalent within the first 15 minutes after injection while you're still at the hospital, and easily treatable once it's identified. So those seem like pretty good odds to me. You've got a 5 in a million chance of having something bad happen, and even if it does, very fixable thing very quickly. So seems like a win to me. So it's not perfect. There are some common side effects that are a real downer that you might experience if you take the vaccine. These include fever, headaches, body aches, fatigue, and sort of flu-like symptoms. Now, unlike actual COVID symptoms, these go away within just a day or two. However, as unpleasant as these symptoms are, what they mean is that the vaccine is actually working. You're experiencing this because your body thinks it has an infection, which means that it's producing those antibodies that you need in order to have immunity. So, you know, that tingling sensation means that it's working. So I thought I would take this last bit to answer any concerns or questions or myths that might be surrounding the COVID-19 vaccine. First off, can I get COVID from taking the vaccine? Absolutely not. It is impossible to get COVID from taking the vaccine, I guess unless the nurse at the hospital gives it to you by coughing on you, because the injection itself contains none of the virus at all, none of its RNA that is infectious and can harm you, and so it's just not physically possible. So no, you can't get the virus from taking the vaccine. Should I still take the vaccine if I've already had COVID? According to the CDC, absolutely. Yes, you should. And the reason why is because despite the fact that you will definitely have antibodies from having recovered from the virus itself, we don't know exactly how long those antibodies last. And we do know that the COVID vaccine is highly effective. And so if we're trying to help guarantee that you're not spreading it to other people or catching it again, it's a good idea to take the vaccine. Now, they do recommend that you wait at least 4 weeks after an infection with COVID to get the vaccine, because of basically supply and demand. We have a lot of vulnerable populations out there that need the vaccine. We have a limited amount of vaccine, and we don't know how effective it is for treating people immediately after having COVID. Does the COVID vaccine alter my DNA? I've already answered this one earlier, but just as a recap in case you skipped to this part, no, the COVID vaccine does not alter your DNA in any way, shape, or form, and it does not enter the nucleus of any of your cells where your DNA lives. So, nice. Is it safe for me to take the vaccine if I'm planning on becoming pregnant? Well, I'm not planning on becoming pregnant, but if you are, according to the CDC and independent researchers, it is safe to take the vaccine, and it is unlikely to cause any sort of risk to a person trying to become pregnant in either the short or the long term. You notice I looked to the right because I was looking at a direct quote from the CDC. So go for it. Are people dying from taking the vaccine? Look, I get it. It is very concerning to be among the first to take a new vaccine, and this leads people into latching on to things like viral, no pun intended, social media posts about, for example, this doctor in Florida who took the vaccine and then died shortly after. Now, obviously, this got everyone concerned, including the CDC and others, so they looked into this and found that the doctor had very serious previous underlying medical issues and already had COVID and was showing symptoms before having the vaccine. And so after lab results and clinical examination went through, they determined that the vaccine was not a contributing factor whatsoever to his death. Right? So I get the concern, but they investigated it. That was ruled out as a potential cause. Now, on the other side of this, you have to think about who's getting the vaccine. There are 33 million people that have gotten it, and for the most part, it is the most vulnerable of our population, the elderly and people with serious underlying medical conditions. Well, of course, some of those people are going to die after taking the vaccine, but that doesn't mean that the vaccine killed them. They already had serious medical conditions. And so, of course, anytime someone dies after taking the vaccine, they're going to do an investigation into it to see if it was causal. It's not just a correlation, that it didn't just happen within the same time period, but one caused the other. And at this point, the CDC hasn't identified any cases in which the vaccine has caused a person's death. Right? If I look to the right, that's because I'm reading directly from a quote from the Center for Disease Control. And so the current consensus is that the vaccine hasn't killed anyone and hopefully won't ever kill anyone. Is there anyone who shouldn't get the vaccine? Yes, absolutely. This is a two-part vaccine. If you are someone who took the first vaccine and then had a severe reaction, so you had that anaphylaxis, you should not get the second dose. If you are allergic to any of the ingredients found in the vaccine, then you should not take it. Now, for those of you that are concerned, here are the ingredients of the vaccine for you to review to see if you are allergic to any of them. Now, for 99.999% of you, the answer is no, because most of them are hypoallergenic. But just in case, there are the ingredients. Judge for yourself. Was the COVID vaccine designed to control the general population by having us inject microchip tracing or nanotransducers into our brain? No. Are the COVID-19 vaccines stored at such incredibly low temperatures because of the preservatives in them? Actually, no. It's quite the opposite. There are no preservatives in either of the vaccines. They are stored at such incredibly low temperatures because, as I said before, messenger RNA is incredibly fragile and breaks down easily with warmer temperatures, and so in order to ensure the integrity of the messenger RNA, they are kept very, 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 very cool. So that's that. Now, obviously, I can't answer all of your questions and concerns about the vaccine in this video, but if you have more questions and concerns, I encourage you to go to the CDC website, which is displayed here and will also be in the description for the video, to do more research yourself and look for answers to any other questions you may have. If you want to know where I got any of my information, I have ever so loserishly included a works cited page as well, so you can look at all of my references for the information that I shared here today. I hope that you found this useful, and if not, that's okay. Have a good one.